There is an uncomfortable truth about modern history that is rarely spoken about and often deliberately ignored. From a very young age, we are taught that wars are inevitable, that some wars are necessary, that sacrifice is noble, and that violence is sometimes the price of freedom. Words like liberty, democracy, and national security are repeated so often that they eventually become unquestionable. But when you pull back the curtain, you begin to see a colder, more calculated reality behind those words: money, power, debt, and interest. Wars have never existed only on battlefields. They have existed just as much in banks, stock exchanges, factories, and accounting ledgers. While some families sent their sons to die, others calculated how long the war might last, which raw materials would become more valuable, and which loans would yield the highest returns. And perhaps earlier than anyone else in the modern era, the United States realized something crucial. War was not just a struggle to be won. If structured correctly, war could become a sustainable economic model. To understand how this system was built, we need to go back to 1914, to the outbreak of the First World War. Europe had turned into a massive machine of destruction. Empires collided, millions of soldiers were thrown into trenches, and artillery thundered without pause. But beyond the visible devastation, another front was consuming resources at an unimaginable speed: finance. War devoured money. National treasuries emptied, gold reserves evaporated, taxes fell short, and whatever could be extracted from the population vanished within months. This is where the United States entered the picture. It was not yet sending soldiers. It was not yet officially at war. But economically, it was already deeply involved. American industry had the capacity to produce everything the war demanded. American banks had the liquidity to finance it. Britain and France desperately needed weapons, ammunition, food, and raw materials. The United States was ready to supply all of it, but not for free. It would be sold on credit. Wall Street banks, most notably J.P. Morgan, played a historic role during this period. Morgan was not simply a lender, it effectively became the purchasing agent for the British and French governments. What would be bought, from which factory, at what price, and shipped on which vessel, these decisions were made in New York. Billions of dollars in loans were arranged, and none of this was charity. Every dollar came with interest. Every shipment turned into a future obligation. By the time the United States officially entered the war in 1917, neutrality was already an illusion. Financially, America was tied to the outcome. If Britain and France lost, Wall Street would lose with them. This is the moment when war and finance truly locked together. National security rhetoric merged with economic interest. The public was asked to sacrifice. Liberty bonds were introduced. These were not just financial instruments, they were psychological tools. Buying bonds became an act of patriotism. Posters, rallies, films, and speeches all delivered the same message: give your money to save your country. Children were given coin banks and taught to contribute their spare change. Small personal savings flowed into a massive pool of public debt. But the darkest part of this system was clear. While ordinary people sacrificed, the largest gains accumulated at the very top. Factories reported record profits. Banks earned interest from both governments and citizens. War had become something that could be financed through debt, and once that door was opened, it could never truly be closed. By the time the Second World War began, the model was fully tested and refined. Europe once again descended into chaos, but this time America was prepared. President Roosevelt described the nation as the arsenal of democracy. In reality, the United States had become the financial center of democracy as well. Even before officially entering the war, production was ramping up and industries were reorganized for conflict. War bonds returned on a massive scale. More than 85 million Americans purchased them, nearly the entire population. Once again, the public became the lender of last resort. The Federal Reserve supported the system. Interest rates were controlled. Major corporations received government-guaranteed contracts. These contracts carried little competition, no real risk, and virtually no chance of loss. War had become a safe investment. When the war ended, Europe lay in ruins, its cities flattened, its economies shattered, its populations exhausted and traumatized. Entire generations had been consumed by conflict. In stark contrast, the United States emerged not just intact, but dominant. Its factories had not been bombed. Its infrastructure was untouched. Its industrial capacity had expanded rather than collapsed. Most of the world's gold reserves were now concentrated in American vaults, giving the United States unprecedented leverage over the global monetary system. Its military presence stretched across continents, and its political influence followed wherever its troops were stationed. With the Bretton Woods Agreement, this imbalance was formalized. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, anchoring international trade and finance. This shift is often framed as a neutral, technical solution to post-war instability, a pragmatic decision to bring order to global finance. But in reality, it marked the consolidation of a financial empire forged through war. The dollar's dominance was not accidental. It was backed by industrial strength, military reach, and the implicit understanding that American power would enforce the system it benefited from. The Cold War ensured that this structure would not be temporary. War did not end in 1945. It simply evolved. Direct confrontation was replaced by arms races, nuclear brinkmanship, proxy wars, and permanent military readiness. Defense spending became normalized, embedded into the economy as a routine expense rather than an emergency response. Economists stepped in to rationalize this new reality, providing theories and terminology to justify it. Military expenditure was reframed as an engine of growth, a stabilizing force for employment and industry. What had once been extraordinary wartime measures became long-term economic strategy, accepted and rarely questioned. Vietnam revealed the fractures beneath the surface. Militarily, it was a failure. Strategically, it damaged America's global image. Socially, it tore the country apart. Yet financially, the system never stopped functioning. Government deficits expanded rapidly. Inflation accelerated. The strain on the monetary system grew impossible to ignore. Eventually, the final link between money and gold was severed. The gold standard was abandoned entirely. Currency was no longer tied to a tangible asset. It was backed by trust. Trust in the American state, and more importantly, trust in its power. That power rested not on morality or ideology, but on unmatched military dominance and global reach. The 1970s brought a new shock. Energy crises rippled through the global economy, exposing vulnerabilities and reshaping financial relationships. Out of this chaos emerged the petrodollar system. Oil, the most critical resource of the modern world, was priced exclusively in US dollars. This single decision ensured permanent global demand for the American currency. Nations needed dollars to function, to trade, to survive. Military presence in key regions ensured compliance. The relationship between money and war became inseparable. Finance relied on force, and force was sustained by finance. The Gulf War marked another turning point. It was the first war broadcast live into living rooms around the world. Missiles, night vision footage, and surgical strikes were transformed into spectacle. At the same time, it functioned as a demonstration. Advanced weaponry was not only deployed, it was showcased. Defense contractors benefited instantly. Stock prices climbed. War became not just a military operation, but a global marketing event, proof of concept for the modern military-industrial system. After September 11th, this system reached its most extreme expression. The war on terror expanded across continents and decades. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq ultimately cost trillions of dollars when long-term care, interest on debt, and reconstruction were included. These sums were so vast they became difficult to comprehend. Entire generations could have received free education. Infrastructure could have been rebuilt. Healthcare systems could have been transformed. Instead, the money flowed into prolonged conflict. Defense corporations grew larger and more powerful. Banks financed expanding deficits. Interest accumulated quietly, year after year. The wars themselves did not end in clear victories. Afghanistan collapsed back into chaos. Iraq destabilized an entire region. But from a financial perspective, the system did not fail. Contracts were fulfilled, payments were made, profits were recorded. The machinery was never designed to achieve decisive outcomes. It was designed for continuity, for duration, for permanence. This leads to the most unsettling truth of all. Wars can be lost militarily, but they are rarely lost financially. In this system, profit is not tied to success or failure. It is tied to time. The longer the conflict, the more money flows. The inflation you experience today, the rising cost of living, the expanding national debt, these are not isolated problems. They are echoes of decades of war-driven finance. Wars are not fought only in distant deserts or foreign cities. They are fought in your wallet, in your savings, in your purchasing power. Real financial education is not about memorizing investment jargon or learning how to play within the system. It is about understanding who the system truly serves. The next time you hear words like security, threat, or intervention, pause and ask a simple question. Who profits from this? Because history makes one thing painfully clear. Wars may begin with ideals, slogans, and promises, but they always end on balance sheets. And whether you understand the system or not, you will still be asked to pay its price. If this video gave you a new perspective, let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you think after seeing history through this lens. And if you want to keep going deeper, if you want to understand how money, power, and conflict really shape the world you live in, make sure to subscribe. This is only the beginning. There's much more I want to show you.